hopefully it will keep recording. It did, yay. When technology works, it's a nice thing. So I want to welcome everybody to Researching Your House History. A couple of housekeeping things that we can talk about. If you need to ask a question, please use the chat function at the bottom. Also, you can say hi and wave and let us know that you're there in the chat function. I'll be monitoring the chat for Callie. If you have technical problems with Zoom, please use the Q&A. I know that's a little odd, but that's what most people seem to be doing. So chat is for questions, Q&A is for tech problems. And this webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to go back and watch if you missed something. You should have also received a handout in your email this morning about 9:30 from Callie with information, so you should be able to use that. We'll also have a second session of this. It'll be the same information, but I'm kind of thinking that a lot of people are going to take this one, they're going to go off and do research, and they're going to come back to the second one with a lot of questions. So that will be on May 30th, which is a Saturday. It's the last Saturday of the month at 10 a.m., just like this one. And you'll need to register for that one as well. At 5 o'clock today, registration will open for that session. A couple of things that is happening or have been happening at CALS, at the Central Arkansas Library System. We are doing curbside pickup, and my slide was wrong. We do it Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So check out cals.org for more information about that. We also are answering our phones. So we have what we are calling a Ask a Librarian, Ask a Genealogy service. So you can call any branch, but you can also call the Roberts Library for genealogy questions, and go to our website, robertslibrary.org, for more information about that. Okay, so now I am going to make Callie the host. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. And then I'm going to introduce you. So let me pull up your intro. Okay. So Callie is a native of Arkansas and graduated from the University of Arkansas in 2008 with a Bachelor's of Science in Architectural Studies. In 2010, she earned a Master's in Architectural History from the University of Virginia. As part of her graduate requirements, she completed a thesis entitled Euine Fay Jones, Architecture is Invention, is Innovation, but it is also remembering. I really did practice reading that several times. She worked as the University of Virginia Registrar aboard the Semester at Sea Spring 2011 voyage around the world. And in 2011, she returned to Arkansas and works for the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. As their education and outreach coordinator, she has worked with individuals and groups across the state to identify, research, and nominate structures to the National Register of Historic Places. So everybody virtually give Callie a big round of applause, and we'll get started learning about this great house history. So I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you, Heather. I just wanted to give a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. As Heather said, you received an outline, a handout that we developed that has resources for researching historic properties. This is very Arkansas focused and does include a lot of information that is only applicable to Arkansas, but it's a really good checklist. It's a checklist I use myself. But we also wanted you to have that because I am going to be presenting on a bunch of different resources, and I wanted to be sure that you all had that information so you're not like scrambling to take notes or scrambling to write down websites. All of the websites that I'm going to be visiting today are listed in that handout, as well as notes that I'm not going to cover, but it has additional information. So please definitely check out that handout. It may even be something you want to bring up to have to reference as we go through some of these. So I'm going to start my PowerPoint, and I'm going to be going between the PowerPoint and some websites to kind of show you exactly how to reach a couple of these different resources. I'm going to try to focus mostly on the things that are available online that we can still do research on. And some of the research part that I'm going to be talking about are obviously things that you can only do at the library or at other places. And again, some of those are closed now, but we hope those will be reopening soon. And also, I'm going to be talking for about 45 minutes, and then we'll take a quick break. And then we'll come back and finish out my program and then leave some time at the end for some questions. So Heather's going to be watching the chat for me as well. So if we have anything that's super urgent that needs to be talked about that you need to know right now, that's fine. But if we could save some of the questions for the end, I'm happy to go through some of those. Also, as Heather promoted on the Facebook page, this is not something that you have to have an old house to know or to find information on. It's something that you can find information on houses that are even 20 or 30 or 40 years old. We're really looking at things now that are up to 1970 for the National Register because that's kind of 50 years now. So we are looking at what people consider more, younger properties, though they are still 50 years old. So let's get started here. All right. So I'm going to do a quick overview of what the National Register of Historic Places is, and then we're going to get into these kind of research resources. So the National Register of Historic Places is a program that we help run as the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. We are what's called a SHPO, or State Historic Preservation Office. Every state and every territory has one. And our specific mission is to identify, evaluate, register, and preserve the state's historic and cultural resources, and then seek to instill that preservation ethic in future generations of Arkansans. So we do all kinds of programs like this one where we teach, but we also do programs for children's groups. We do school age groups, and we also have a really popular coloring book series. So we try to do all kinds of programs. The National Register of Historic Places is our country's list of significant sites worthy of preservation. It is an honorary designation, so that means it's not something that really puts restrictions at a national level on there. There are some local restrictions that may be placed, but that's a very site-specific thing. They are generally 50 years old or older, and they have to have integrity in all of these areas. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, what integrity specifically means. Also, we have about 3 different lists in Arkansas. The National Register is probably the most well known, and that's the federal list that's really in charge of the National Park Service. But we also have a local statewide list, which is the Arkansas Register of Historic Places. And this is for properties that are for one reason or another not eligible for the National Register. This could be because they've been altered or changed or moved, or they just don't reach the level of kind of national significance. But we do feel that they are important to the local community, so we do still want to recognize those sites. Here's a few that are a battlefield and a house in Van Buren. Sometimes this happens because things have been radically altered on a house or things, but we still want to recognize those properties. We also have one step up from the National Register, which is the National Historic Landmarks. These are sites that are identified by the National Park Service and local states as nationally significant historic properties. We have 25 of these in Arkansas. We actually got one recently moved into the state, and that was the USS Hoga, which is now at the Arkansas Inland Maritime Museum. And the Hoga was a tugboat that was operating and did rescue missions during the attack on Pearl Harbor during World War II. So very significant sites. We have several in Arkansas. One of those includes Central High. We also have the Rower Relocation Cemetery in Rower, which is a Japanese American internment camp. We also have several sites across the state, like the Centennial Baptist in Helena, which was recently damaged by a storm. So very interesting sites, nationally significant, 25 of those in Arkansas. So what types of property are eligible? As most people know, buildings are eligible, courthouses, historic homes, churches, but you can also list objects. One of my favorite is the Hoo Hoo Monument in Gurdon. Definitely check out their Arkansas Encyclopedia article. It's pretty funny. Things like markers and statues can be eligible. Sites can be eligible: battlefields, cemeteries, landscapes, archaeological ruins, several of those that are listed across the state. Engineering structures can also be listed, and we have several. We have a couple of railroad tunnels that are listed, as well as several bridges that are listed, fire towers, boats. I talked about the USS Hoga, also the USS Razorback, as well as grain elevators, canals. All of these things can be listed. We also sometimes list properties in districts, and we're actually going to be looking at a couple of properties today as examples of researching that are listed in districts. These can be residential areas, commercial areas. We even have some farms and parks that are listed as districts. We also have the, so just a quick list of what you can list a property under. So there are 4 different main categories that you list a property under. Those associated with a historic context, event, or theme. So like Central High is listed because of the 1957 Central High desegregation crisis. So that's a historic event or theme. It can be associated with a significant person, exemplary design or architecture, and also under D, which has potential to yield information important in history or prehistory, which is basically archaeology. So just a couple of quick examples. Criterion A, I mentioned Central High, but we also have the Drennan Scott site in Van Buren, associated with John Drennan's role in Native American affairs in Oklahoma, what is now Oklahoma. So important historic site there in Van Buren. Associated with an important person, sometimes we think of these as, you know, George Washington slept here houses, but it does have to be associated with the actual life of a historic person. So this is the Bob Burns house in Van Buren, where he grew up and spent most of his young adulthood. And this is associated with him for his many events that he did and his kind of later career as a comedian. He was well known for his Arkansas Traveler kind of bit, and also for creating musical instruments, one of which was known as the bazooka, and that's why the U.S. Army calls their weapon the bazooka. It was after his homemade instrument. So a really interesting house here associated with an important person. Also significant in architecture or craftsmanship. So this is what most places tend to go under, just because it tends to be, you know, a little bit easier to talk about the architecture if you don't know much about the people who are there. But this is a church in Greenwood, Sebastian County, a good vernacular Gothic revival church. A lot of places across Arkansas and across the nation are listed because of their architectural integrity. So being important examples of a certain style or a certain craftsman listed for architects or for builders or for masons. So this one tends to be a very popular category. And then criterion D is for archaeological value. We have several sites across the state that are associated with Native Americans. This is an example of a pictograph site known as the Edgemont Shelter. The only thing that's a little different about archaeological sites is we tend to not publicize where they are, and this is just for safety. So we don't publicize archaeological sites. We won't tell you where they are. We still do have information about those that are listed on our website, but we don't share that information. I mean, we work in concert with the Arkansas Archaeological Survey to make sure that those sites are documented and people know where they are, but that we don't share that. As I said, historic integrity, basically what we're saying is that a property to be listed has to retain enough historic integrities to still be recognizable. So one of the things I talk about a lot is, you know, if somebody who originally had seen that house or built that house when it was first built, walked up to it today, would they recognize it? Would they still say, okay, yes, this is my house, or this is a house I knew when I was young? So on the left, you can see an image of the White House. It retains its original features. The image on the right with the blocked-in front porch, not so much. This would not be something we would list as a building on the National Register or really even the Arkansas Register. So just to go over that, you know, it has to be a historic resource, some kind of building, object, structure, or site, or grouping a district. At least 50 years old. This is a general rule. We do have buildings that have been listed less than 25 years in or less than 50 years in Arkansas. The most famous example is Thorn Crown Chapel, which was listed when it was 25 years old, but it's definitely something that's unusual. 50 years is really the general rule. It has to retain enough integrity to be listed, and it has to demonstrate some sort of significance. So you have to be able to prove that something significant happened there, or it's a significant example of a type of architecture or engineering, or that it's a significant archaeological site. So it has to have some sort of significance. So not every old building is eligible for the National Register, but we can determine that significance and establish that significance by researching many properties. So we're going to get into the list now on researching historic properties. Basically, I'm going to go through the list as we start from the top to the bottom that's on that handout. One of the first things that I always tell people to do is to look to see if somebody's already done the research before. Is it something that somebody has looked at before? Has somebody submitted information to the Historic Preservation Program on it? Is it already listed? You can search the National Register database by going to our website, archaeopreservation.com, and I'll show you that here in just a second. And you can also call us if you have any questions. We tend to have our database done by physical address, so the property's address, 911 address, where it's located, based on roads address or nearby roads, intersections. So if you have the address or at least a nearby intersection, we can usually look it up in our database to see if it's something that we have looked at before. Now there's about, there's about 2,500, I think it's more than that, sites that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places in Arkansas. And this includes lots of districts that have many, many houses in them, many, many commercial buildings. So there's lots of things that are already listed that you can look on our website for, but also we have surveyed over 40,000 different properties in Arkansas, many of those, as you can tell, not listed on the National Register. So we still go out and survey properties, even if they're might not be eligible for the National Register. They may just have some general interest or some historical significance that's not, something that we have worked on to make it a National Register site. So we could have information on a property that we have just stumbled across in the last 50 years since our office has been going. And so we may have some information that's not really publicly out there. And to find that, you just have to call us or email us at info@arkansaspreservation.com, and we can look up those survey forms. So I'm going to show you quickly on our website how you would get there. So arkansaspreservation.com is our website, and to look up National Register properties, you just go under Properties, National Register of Historic Properties, and search National Register listings. And then you can search basically anywhere in the state. So you can search by county and get all of those results for county, or you can search by city. It'll pull up all of those in the city. You can also search by the name or description if you're looking for something a little bit more specific. So you can see here all the properties that are listed in and around Conway that have Conway as the town that's cited. And then once you find one that you want to look up a little bit more information about, you just simply hit the View PDF and it'll bring up that National Register form. A quick word on National Register forms. Since we've been doing these since the National Historic Preservation Act of the 1960s. The first forms that were done were not that great. They tend to be really short. This one, you can kind of see it has about 3 pages of information. Today, when we write a National Register nomination, we look for anywhere from 15 to 30 pages. So it's almost like a kind of college history project, a college paper. We really want to be sure that we are getting all of the information today that we can put in there and all of the background and context that we can. Whereas at the very beginning of the National Register process, they were really just trying to list as many properties as they could because they were endangered. They wanted to be sure to save this information for the future. So you can see this one was listed in 1980. Today, it's a little more detailed on the information that we do require. So sometimes these old nominations have good information, but they're just really short. So you do need additional information to research if you're looking for more. But most of them do have pretty good bibliographies about where they got that history from. And sometimes this is the only record on some of these properties because they may have been interviews with people or diaries that people had access to, and those may now be gone. So this could be the last kind of remnant of that information. So always a good place to start looking. Another item that we have, I talked about the National Register forms, but also our survey forms, which are very important. And I can show you an example of one of those. So survey forms are what our office goes out and completes, let me rotate it here for you, to record these properties. We look at these properties in a lot of different ways. We do drawings if we can. We take photographs. This is I'm going to show you kind of a row of houses later that we're going to look at that haven't really been researched much before, to kind of show you some examples of places to get information. And this is across the street. If you know the Park Hill fire station that's on top of the hill right in the middle of Park Hill in North Little Rock, this is across the street. So this was done in 1995, this survey, and you can tell that it captures quite a bit of information. If you drill down into these, you can see that the information that we're collecting is things like porch details, roof details, how many chimneys does it have a basement? And we take photographs. So these photographs from the 1990s are a good record of this property, as it's changed a little bit since then. So that's what's definitely worth asking our office to see if we can find information for you that might have already been done. Some other really good sources of information that are also on this checklist: interviews with property owners, church pastors, historians, docents, descendants, neighbors. So anyone in the area that you can talk to that may know something about that building. We often find really interesting information when we're surveying a property because somebody just walks up from next door and goes, oh yeah, I knew them. They were there for 50 years and they had this house and they built it and they did this and this. So sometimes your neighbors are your best sources of information, or your local information people. The one really interesting resource that I've found is also really helpful if there's a insurance salesman in the town. Those can also be a really good source of information. They often have files that date back many, many years. If it's been somebody who's had an office there for 50, 60 years, they'll know a lot of information about properties that may not be public information that you can find in archives. Property and tax records are also very important and also a good place to really start some research. These are often available online at your local county courthouse, online, or at your local courthouse or tax assessor. And we'll take a look at that one here in just a second. I can show you kind of what Pulaski County looks like. I'm not going to go through the actual steps of doing deed research in terms of book and page number and that kind of thing, because that is a little harder to do online. That could be a whole class in and of itself, but I'll show you just generally where to get that information. And there are lots of people online too that talk about how to run a deed and that kind of thing. Local historical societies or museums are also really great. I'll show you that list, but the Arkansas Historical Association does have a list that's updated periodically of local historical societies, and I tend to refer people to them lots of times if they have a question about a property in a certain county or a certain community. You know, I'm not the expert on every community in Arkansas, but these local historical societies do have people that are. And usually they have files or history or photographs or information that might not be available just on the internet or around in archives that are here in Little Rock. And then also on this, historical society journals, and we'll take a look at ArcIndex. Or Index Arkansas, which is a really great resource to looking at many of those historical journals. So let's take a look at a couple of those. Get back to my website here. So So for the Pulaski County, Arkansas Assessor's Office, basically my one place that I go here is under Services and Property Lookup. Property Lookup is really where you do most of the searching through here. And this is where you can search by name or address. And if you don't know any names, this is a good place to kind of start gathering some names. Names are more helpful in terms of researching in a lot of different places online because most places are geared for genealogical research. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to ancestry. But this is a good place to kind of start collecting names because we can see some of the past ownership. So I'm just plugging in a house that I know that I've looked at recently in North Little Rock that I know has never really had much research done on it. And like I said, it's across the street from the fire department or the fire station that's up there. So we'll just search this. And so here's the property, and we just go in to look at it. And it'll tell us very general information. So what's the section township range, what lot and block it's on. It will also tell us, you know, the exact location. It will also give us some of the past ownership. Again, you can see it only goes really through 1998. Always be careful online when you see dates like this that jump from 1998 to 1900. I'm pretty sure that's 1990 and not 1900. Also, it should give you some good pictures, and it'll give you some information about the property, what it's made out of, and it may give you a year built. On the assessor's website, always be suspect of a year built date. These tend to not be correct unless it's very recent. So something that was built from about 1970 to now, because then somebody would be alive who would like know when that building was built. These tend to be based off of somebody just looking at the house and going, oh, it looks about 1950s, or oh, it looks about 1920s. I have seen ones that are as much as 50 to 60 years wrong once you actually do the research. So this one I'm thinking is actually pretty close. We'll take a look at a couple of Sanborn maps here in a minute, but yeah, so always be a little suspect of this date. It might be close, but it's not going to be 100% correct 100% of the time. So this is a good place to start with information. Another good place to start is also at the county clerk's office. The county clerk is where they have the actual real estate record. So this is where they have the deed books. And this is a bit clunky to research in, and I'm not going to go through kind of all of it, but there you can search here. You can search by name. So once you start finding names on this property, you can start searching by names and it'll give you some. And then once you start getting really into it and you can find the book and page number for some of those deeds, you can look up by book and page number. Again, it would take an hour or two just to explain how to do most of this. But if you do have questions about this, feel free to email me or to go and contact your county clerk's office. And when they're back open to the public, to go and have somebody show you exactly how to do this on paper. It's actually kind of fun if you're into mysteries and looking up stuff. It takes a while to get this. And you don't always need to start here. A lot of researchers do start with their real estate, and it is a good place to start in terms of looking up information to get some good names. I just kind of feel it's a little clunky, especially as we have so many other resources to look up information. But it's definitely something worth remembering, because there may not be other information anywhere else. This may be something you have to look at, but I can answer questions about that at the end as well. The Arkansas Historical Association, like I said, arkansashistoricalassociation.org, has a really good set of county historical societies. So on their website, you just go to county historical societies, and it's listed by county. So it has good information, at least a good place to start in terms of contacting. And they have a good list of, people to contact, email addresses, websites. Always a good place to start. Again, some of it may be out of date, but at least I've always found it gives you a good place. And they can, if these people can't tell you who, the information themselves, they're usually good about telling you another local organization that might have good information. So always a good place to check. And then Index Arkansas. I always run things through here. I found that, the more general your search terms are, the better. So if I'm looking for a specific property in a specific town, I usually try to run the town name. I try to maybe run the family name through. It is a really nice place to start looking for information because it can give you citations to articles in these history journals, chapters, and newspaper stories that you might not find other places, especially for newspapers that aren't indexed or don't have a paper index that you can look through, and maybe county history journals that you don't have access to. You might not have them in your local library. So a good place to start, a good place to run search terms to, and one I did recently was War Memorial Stadium. We were looking up some information for it, and I did find some really good articles that I would not have known about otherwise by running that search term through here. You are like, this one's going to give me war memorials for other things, but the development of Razorback and War Memorial Stadiums, this was a really good article. And it also gave me some information on some newspaper articles that I did not know about, and about how they funded the stadium. So like here's one, Clinton opposes use of state funds for new stadium. So this was in the 80s. So that was after War Memorial. So it's always good to run your search terms through here. General is usually better on Index Arkansas. Don't try to search for, house at, 418 Magnolia. Try to search for, the town name or the street name or something like that. Local journals, as I said, through Index Arkansas are always a good place to look as well, especially once you know some family names that might be associated with the property. These local journals often have articles that are very, local specific and could be great resources of information that aren't available in other places, because these are really people from those communities writing about those communities. And almost every county at some point has had some sort of historical journal in Arkansas. They may no longer be publishing, but many of them are still around in archives. One great resource through the Central Arkansas Library System that we have in Arkansas is the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. This resource is amazing, and unlike things like Wikipedia and some online encyclopedias, this is not just user-generated. It is a peer-reviewed article collection. So the Encyclopedia of Article can be used for students and scholars. This is something that's very important because it is peer-reviewed. It is reviewed for correctness and authenticity. So most of the time, these articles are not going to have incorrect information in them, so you can trust the sources. They also have really good bibliography sources in them. So I will show you that one. So Arkansas, Encyclopedia of Arkansas, just encyclopediaofarkansas.net. And you simply search by hitting search now. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it does have some really great information. So from the general to the specific. So we have been trying to add National Register sites throughout Arkansas into the encyclopedia, but it also has just really good general information about local cities and communities. It also includes census data, great pictures. Like I know that little house that we were looking at is in Park Hill, and there's a good article on the Park Hill Historic District that gives you more general information. So this is a really good place to start as well, just plugging in communities or names of people. And they also have really good initial steps for additional information. So really good resources, definitely worth checking out the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. It's being added to all of the time, and it's a huge, really good resource to definitely check out. Oops. Along with the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, there are also city and county histories that are beyond the journals that are available in lots of the different archives, especially at Central Arkansas Library, at the Arkansas Studies Institute, and Roberts Library, the Bobby Roberts Library, and Arkansas State Archives. All of these are listed on the resource sheet that I gave you. But definitely take a look to see in those archives if there's a local county or city history. Sometimes these were done at important anniversaries for a city or county. Several of them were done for the bicentennial in 1976. So there are lots of good resources. I know for Paragould and Greene County, which is where I'm from originally, there are really good resources about, like, there was a centennial edition of the newspaper that's available. There was a lot of like histories that the local historical organization put together about different families in that community. So that's a really good place to look as well for very hyper local information. And it's going to be very different county to county. But things like the Arkansas Studies Institute and Arkansas Archives in Arkansas and Little Rock have copies of a lot of those. Here's some more good history books that are related specifically to Arkansas. And these, or a couple of them are, these are all also listed in that resource sheet, so I don't feel like you have to scramble to write them down. Arkansas Post Offices from Mimdab to Norse, 1832 to 1990. Wonderful resource on finding post office information. So it has a just alphabetical list of every post office that's ever existed in Arkansas and the dates it opened and the dates it closed. And then sometimes some notes about, what county it's in, but also sometimes some notes about where did the mail go after that? Did it change its name at some point? What's nice about post offices is that there were never two post office with the same name in any state. So if somebody submitted a name for a post office and it was already taken, they would have to choose a new name. And sometimes they went through that process 4 or 5 times to find a name that wasn't already taken. So if you can locate a post office and its name, there's never been another one like that name. So it's a good place to find information, especially about historic communities that were very small and maybe haven't existed for a long time. So sometimes that's a really good place to find a community that maybe now is just gone. It doesn't exist anymore at all. Goodspeed Histories of Arkansas, also a great resource. Most of them can be found online. In part or in whole. Sometimes they're on fully scanned. You can also find them at most of your local libraries, including in the archives at Central Arkansas Library and Arkansas State Archives. Great resource. Only one note that I would say is that a lot of those entries are self-reported. These are things that people sent to the Goodspeed company or were solicited by the Goodspeed company. Sometimes there can be errors in there, either through them printing them or through them just people, maybe exaggerating some information. So just be careful. You may want to double check, birthdays, marriage dates, things like that tends to be correct, but sometimes there could be slight errors in there. So just be careful to make sure you've got maybe more than one source for some of that. But it does have good local town histories, biographies of locally important people, sometimes histories of churches, sometimes histories of schools and a county. So it's a good place to start. Also, the Centennial History of Arkansas by Dallas Herndon came out in the 1920s. And it is also a really good place to start. Sometimes it has information that I can't find anywhere else. It is available online and through Central Arkansas Library System in their archives over at the Arkansas Studies Institute. That book is really great. It's got a couple of volumes. Again, a few errors in it that I've encountered. Again, I think some of those are just copied from other sources. Errors kind of get copied along if they're not checked. So one book that if you're definitely looking at historic houses that you should definitely maybe think about investing in is A Field Guide to American Houses. This is a wonderful resource. A lot of architectural historians in the United States kind of consider it the Bible for architectural preservation. It includes information on basically every type of house that was ever built in the United States, every style. And it was done by Virginia S. and Lee McAllister. Sadly, Virginia S. McAllister just passed away this year. And we were very sad. That book has been it's now in its second edition, and it was a just game changer for architectural history in the United States in terms of really codifying exactly dates for things and styles and what they meant and what all of the characteristics were. A lot of the language that she kind of codified in that book is what we use today when we're doing any kind of writing about architectural history in the United States and in Arkansas. So definitely worth looking at, if not purchasing. And then also a really good book, just for those who may not know much about architecture, is a visual dictionary of architecture by Francis D.K. Ching. And this is one I used in architecture school. It's a dictionary with pictures of architectural stuff. It's a really good resource, especially if you're looking for what's that name of that thing on top of a house that's on the shingles. Like if you don't really know some of the terminology, I still use it today. It's a really good resource. As I mentioned before, the Bobby L. Roberts Library of Arkansas History and Art is a really great resource. That's through the Central Arkansas Library System. Basically, if you're in downtown and you have the library to your back, it's on the left. They have an art gallery and art and store on the first floor, and then the second floor is the Arkansas Studies Institute. And this is a great resource for looking up Arkansas, especially Central Arkansas, but Arkansas information. They have collections of history, manuscripts, photos, postcards, maps, plans, directories, city directories, diaries. I basically run search terms through there for every project I've ever done. We'll take a look at their website here in just a second, but it's a really great resource, and we'll take a look because I wanted to talk about historic photographs as well. Historic photographs are great resources. They can really tell you about what a property may have looked like in the past. Sometimes they're in archives, sometimes they're from family. I've been able to find historic photographs sometimes where it's a young child on the front lawn, and thankfully they had like a corner of the building in the background, and I was able to say, okay, now we know that this house was there by at least this date because of this photograph. So historic photographs can really be a great tool, and lots of archives have things like postcards or old family photo albums that you can look through. Sometimes they're a little hard to find, and sometimes you just stumble across them. But historic photographs really are, if you can find one, it really is super helpful. So we'll take a look at the library website there and kind of show you a little bit about how you can search. And then we'll take a short break and come back and talk about Sanborn maps. But let's take a look at this website real quick. So I have given you on that resource sheet the website for this search for the Arkansas Studies Institute. We're going to talk about historic photographs through this one. There are lots of different places you can look for historic photographs. The Arkansas State Archives and the Roberts Library and the Arkansas Studies Institute. So I just went to their website, and we're just going to click on photographs because that's what we're going to look at for right now. But they literally have all kinds of documents. And what's nice is, like, I'm going to plug in War Memorial again because I know that there's a few photographs of that. But definitely, you know, for Park Hill, plug in the name of the street, plug in the name of a family that you may be associated with those, and you can really find some really interesting photographs. So here's one of the stadium entrance, a postcard that we used in a recent history of War Memorial Stadium. So it is a really good place to look for photos, and there are really good photo collections through the Butler Center, including the Earl Sanders Jr. collection and the Clifton Hull photograph collection. There are also large postcard collections. Some of those are labeled as, you know, I think there's city postcards, there's event postcards, there's also a natural disasters postcard collection. The natural disasters one is really interesting because I've been able to find a few photographs of buildings that sustained damage just from like tornadoes or floods, but we were able to date the building because we knew that building was there during that flood or during that tornado. So sometimes you find things in interesting and weird places, but it's always worth putting in the names of people and the names of streets and the names of communities into those collections to see if you could find photographs that might be associated with that. And sometimes it's interesting what people took photographs of. They may have taken this on a photograph on a trip to this town, and you might be able to find them. Unfortunately, a lot of the photographs are not scanned. They do have quite a few that are, but it is worth taking a visit to the archive when they do open back up to look at those collections and find some of those that aren't scanned. A lot of them are, they're still there available to look at. They're just not available online. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. Please be sure if you have questions to type them in the chat, and Heather and I will be watching that. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about Sanborn maps. So I will share that real quick, and then we'll take a quick break.
We've had a couple of questions, Callie, but I think I've answered most of them. I don't think some of them were logistical, like what website were you on? And so I just typed that in.
Okay, perfect.
And we also have the QQA collection at the Butler Center.
I have that on my notes to talk about as well.
Okay.
Did we have a number for how many people?
We have 20. We had 22. We lost somebody, so now we have 21.
Well, good. But that's still a pretty good group.
Yeah, no, it's a great group. And not all of them have your last name.
Is it sharing okay? I
think it's
following okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been fine. And with the weather, who knows what was going to happen, right?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of nice out here now.
Is it nice? Okay. I'm in a closed-in closet without any light, so.
Stop. Now the cat's decided to be involved.
I did post in the chat earlier because I forgot to say this. If everybody will change their "to" in the chat from all panelists to all panelists and attendees so everybody can see your questions, that is very helpful. And I can't remember if I told you this or not, Callie, but right now for Cal's card holders, Ancestry Library Edition is available at home.
Okay, great.
We think it will go away on May 31st, but we don't know that for sure. And to get access, you have to email, I think it's Cal's info, or it's info@cals.org. and have your library card looked up, and then they'll send you instructions. But anytime when there's not a pandemic on, can access most of the census data on Family Search or Heritage Quest, and then from the library, using your library card, you can get Fold 3, which are military records, which I know probably don't apply as much here, but the fire insurance maps are available with your library card anytime, non-pandemic.
Yes.
So that's very
I knew about the Sanborn stuff, but I didn't realize that they were allowing people to do the family or the library ancestry. So, because I'm going to be talking about ancestry here in a minute, just to talk about the city directories and stuff, to kind of show you how to look at those. So
yeah, so right now they have unfettered access to Ancestry at home, which is really nice, and I hope it doesn't go away. Maybe Ancestry's listening, and they'll say, oh, for the rest of the summer you can have it. So
awesome.
Okay,
I
will go away.
Okay, we're gonna get started here again. So let me share my screen again. So we talked a little bit about historic photographs. We're going to get back into this, and we're going to talk about Sanborn maps. I also wanted to just note that Heather reminded me, and we'll talk a little bit more a little later, but that at the Butler Center, they also have the Quapaw Quarter Association records, which are great records, and you can search by address in that specific collection. If you live anywhere or looking at a house anywhere in, the Governor's Mansion and area, kind of leaking over to Central High, Dunbar, even in Hillcrest, they have done a lot of research over the past, 50 years. And they have mostly organized their archives by architect and by a street address or the name of a historic house. And so they are a great resource, and you can just find their collection through their website by just typing in Quapaw Quarter. It's not one that's scanned. You would have to go to the library to really look at those files, but really great information, and they have been collecting information, as I said, for over 50 years. So this is something that is worth taking a look at and keeping on. That's why, and I've got it on the checklist, the resource list, to definitely check if it's a property in Little Rock, because they do have a good collection. So Sanborn maps. For those of you who've never heard of Sanborn maps or don't know what Sanborn maps are, it is a resource that as an architectural historian you get very familiar with. We use them all of the time to do research. They are fire insurance maps made by the Sanborn Map Company. The Sanborn Map Company basically had a monopoly in the United States on creating these maps. They did them for cities, big and small, across the country, from the late 1800s through about 1950. I think the last ones they did were in 1960s. And what they did is they would send out their representatives or hire local map makers, and they would go street by street, house by house, as big as the city limits of that city or town or village that they were in, and collect information, draw the plans of properties, and note what they were made out of. And they did this because they were use these maps to sell to insurance companies and to sell to different places, so that the insurance company would know what the fire risk for these properties was. So you obviously had a different fire risk if your house was made of wood versus if it was brick veneered, or if it was made of stone, or if it was a courthouse that was made of brick or stone or something like that. So it's a really great resource because it tells us exactly what the footprint of a building was. It tells us, does it have porches on the front? It tells us also what the size of the property, if it was 2 stories, sometimes it tells us what kind of roof it had. It's a really great resource, and it's amazing that these things were even made, much less that they survive. There are large collections of these. The ones that I'm going to show you is through the Central Arkansas Library System. You can access it with your library card from home. It's the Fire Insurance Maps Online collection. You can also access these through several local libraries. A lot of them have them on microfilm for their local community, if they exist. And what's nice about these is that generally, if they did it 1 year, they probably did it 2. So they may have done it, as you see here for Paragould. Here's one from 1894, which I think is the earliest one. And then one with the exact same blocks in 1914. So you can see the change in buildings over that time. And that's what's nice about the maps, is you can see change over time for a lot of these places. Also, they don't have them for every community, but you'd be surprised what communities they do have them for. Sometimes even tiny towns got a Sanborn map for some reason. So it is a great collection. You can find them also at, like I said, your local library. You can also find them at the Library of Congress, has really been working to scan these and put them online. Some local libraries and places will only have the black and white scanned version. Most of these were not scanned in color originally, but they were created in color because the color denotes the materials. And so usually they have a key with them that says, yellow is frame and red is brick or blue is stone. So you'll need to find the key page as well usually. They're also fantastic if you're searching, especially for commercial history or commercial buildings. What's great about that is that they will tell you for that year it won't tell you what the name of the company was that's there. Mostly, sometimes it will, like you can see here, top left on South Pruitt, the Burtick Brothers Department Store. It's a large institution, so they did put that name there, but it will tell you what was in that building. So here's a bank, here's a drugstore, here's a one that's vacant store, furniture and undertaker, that was pretty common, plumber, insurance office, printing, the Order of Elks, benevolent Order of Elks, a Baptist church, open air theater. So they're really great to tell you what commercial activity was actually going on. And we'll take a look at that online through Central Arkansas Library. So again, I'm just have pulled up the Google Earth just to kind of give you an idea of where we're looking and when we look at these Sanborn maps, because they are maps. So we're just looking again at that kind of row of houses that I know really haven't been researched much across from the fire station in Park Hill. So here's JFK, it's about 3 streets over, Magnolia, fire station. We're looking at this row of houses right here. And this row of houses has houses that reach from about 1960 back to about 1910, 1920. So we go to the Central Arkansas Library System. Under Learn and Research Tools, A to Z. And then we go to F because it's under Fire Insurance Maps. And it says Fire Insurance Maps Online or the FEMO. And as you can see, there were other companies that did them, but they really became known as Fire Insurance Maps, Sanborn Maps, because that was the biggest company that was doing them and really kind of had a monopoly on that market. So once you go in, I've already put in my library card, so it's popped up here, but you do have to sign in with your library card number. And then you go to, I usually go to Interactive Map because it'll show you a better map. You can do a place name, so if you're looking to see if that place, Sanborn Maps, you can also use that. But I tend to go to Interactive Map. And then you just plug in the address you're looking for. So we're looking at that 3400 block of North Magnolia in North Little Rock. I plug it in, and it's taking me right to that. So there's that fire station. There's the houses across the street. And what's fantastic is that it shows you that in 1939 it had a Sanborn map. It had a Sanborn map in 50, and it had one in 63. So all you have to do is hit show. And it shows you that index map for that area. So this would have been like page 1 or 2, and here's that volume. Here's all the different Sanborn maps, and here's the one we're looking for, number 339. So we're going to open that map. I'm just going to open it in a separate tab, And then we're going to go to 339. Click that, and here's our map. We're going to zoom in and look right there. There's the fire station. So here's the fire station and the little office and the water reservoirs that are all on top of this hill. And in 1939, there are only 3 houses on this block. And interestingly, we can see that the 516, you can see that the street numbers have changed. So that's something to be aware of, that, you know, 911 street numbers were not a thing until, you know, the mid-century or even later. So street numbers tend to jump around. They could be, the map maker didn't know what the street number was. Sometimes they just started at a block and just started counting. And then sometimes they had street numbers but weren't, you know, prominently displayed, so people didn't know what they were. It wasn't really until the kind of 911 acts in the 60s and 70s made street numbers like legitimately sequential. So it's something that you have to be kind of careful, especially when we'll talk about city directory research here in a little bit. You have to be careful to match up the right year with the right street number, because sometimes they do change. Once you get to about 1950, 60, they tend to even out and be pretty consistent, but just before that, to be aware. Because now this is 34, I think it's like 22 or 23. So see, it's missing the 3 here. They didn't have 3,000 labeled on this map. So a couple of little houses here. And if we look at the street view, we can tell that these houses are a little bit older. They're probably from the 1920s. They're little craftsman bungalows. This one is from plans. So it means that it was under construction or about to be constructed when the map maker went by this area. So he included it on here. It's a frame dwelling. Somebody, I think in the chat, had, what does vend mean? Vend means veneered. So this, with the pink on the outside, I can tell that this is a frame house with a brick veneer. And actually, I met the person who lived in this house, and he is quite elderly and has lived there for quite a long time, but it is a little red brick veneered house. I will give you a hint, definitely, if you're going to do Sanborn map work, check online, just Google Sanborn map abbreviations. Most maps have an abbreviation page on them. Like here, I'll go to the key for this map. So this is page 1 of this volume. So here's, you can see where we were looking up here in North Little Rock. And then here's the key. There are a couple of different organizations and a couple of different universities that have taken all of the keys from all of the maps and really combined them. I have one that's about 4 pages long that has all of the different abbreviations. But you can see all of the information that was packed in these maps. You know, adobe buildings, stone buildings, concrete, hollow brick tile, brick, frame, veneered, brick lined, you know, flat was F, D was dwelling, so flat is an apartment, S is store. So all of this stuff is crammed into these maps in different places, especially lots of things about water, because these are fire insurance maps. So they need to know where the local, does it have sprinklers? Where's the local fire pump? You know, can you get out of the building? Is it safe? Where's the water pipe? So all of these things are crammed into these maps. And it's worth, if you're going to look at Sanborn maps, to go find a key that has a good list of all the abbreviations. Because they can get really confusing sometimes. And sometimes I've found abbreviations that I've never found what the words mean. Like and there are websites where academics like talk about Sanborn maps, that like, what does this series of letters or numbers mean? We have no idea, like, what kind of store could this be? And it could have just been a bad transcribing error, or it could just be that's a weird kind of business that's nowhere else that they never wrote down. So it's definitely worth taking a look at the key and to look at those pages. So we've seen 1939, so now we're going to take a look at 1950 and see how that block has changed. So I'm going to hit show. It's going to pull up that map. It's the same page number. That tends to happen. They tend to not recreate the maps. They just update the maps. So they'll do a new version. So it's basically like a copy with additions to it on that block. So we're going to again look at 1939. Open up that new page. This is see this. So this is Arkansas Volume 3, 1935 to 1950. So let me find 339. So here we are again in Park Hill. Here's the fire station, and look, all of those house rows across the row have been filled in. Again, this was filled in after World War II, so we're looking at 1950 now, after the end of the war. So it's probable that a lot of these houses got built right at the end of the 1940s, right after the war. And here's that couple little houses here that were across the street that were earlier, and then a bunch of houses filled in that were all about the same shape and size. You can see them probably were built, all kind of together there. Again, D, so these are all dwellings. These are all single family dwellings. None of these are really apartments. And you can see there's a couple different sizes here. There's a couple here that are veneered in brick. Looks like this whole community, it's a good history point that this whole community is basically single family occupied. There aren't really a lot of apartment buildings like you would see in kind of downtown Little Rock at this time. And there aren't really, they're all kind of new houses, and some bigger toward the south, and they kind of get smaller as you go toward the north. So this is a really good place to find that kind of history. It also looks like these are kind of smaller houses with not for veneer, whereas you come back over here to Olive Street and they're more brick veneered houses. So these are a little bit more expensive. These are a little bit nicer. Yep, so that, like you said in the thing, that means the 1954 date is wrong. It is. This is probably more like 1948, 1949, something like that. Again, I told you those dates on the assessor's website. I'm always a little suspect. It's a good starting point. It's not ever really a good ending point. I have seen ones for downtown Little Rock that have been wrong by as much as 50 to 60 years. Just because, and it's not their fault, they just don't know, like they don't have that information. They are not running the deed back to see when that house was built. They're just kind of guesstimating. And somebody probably just said, oh yeah, we think it was built in 54. So they just plugged it in. So always good to check. So now that we filled in some of this information, we've got a good idea of this house is basically when it was built. A next step to really look at is city directories. So again, I talked a little bit about earlier about running the deed. The deed, if you ran the deed and went back to every transaction for that property and sold who sold it and who owned it, it's a good way to find out the history of the house. I tend to like to look at city directories because not only will it tell me who maybe owned the house, but it may also tell me who rented the house, who was living there as maybe a servant, who was living there as maybe children, which aren't captured in deeds. So I feel in many respects, since we have the city directories for Little Rock and lots of towns do have them, they're a good place to start, especially for Little Rock, because they'll give you a lot more information than maybe a deed would. It's always great to run the deeds, and sometimes the deed is the only source for information about who owned a property. But if you have city directories, they're definitely worth taking a look at. And we'll take a look at that next, because we're going to talk a little bit about Ancestry.com. So let me go back to my slideshow. Oops. Okay. So as I said, city directories will tell you where someone's business was, where someone lived. Also, they sometimes have great advertisements if you're looking at commercial buildings or looking for an architect or things like that. These are just little examples from some of the local city directories. And as I said, here's one in Park Hill at 126, the Patricia Apartments. The deed may tell you who owned that building, but the city directories is going to tell you all 4 apartments in that building who lived there. And that gives you a great resource to find other information about people who may be in this building that aren't owners. And these are available through Ancestry, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. Also available through Ancestry and several other resources online, including Family Search and Heritage Quest. You can look at census records. And as Heather was saying earlier, you do have an opportunity now during kind of the situation to be able to look at Ancestry through your CALS card. And I'll let Heather talk a little bit about that here in a minute as well, because she had more information on that. If you caught us in the break, she was talking about how you would do that. Census records are great. They can tell you who lived at a place, you know, what their occupation was, who their neighbors were, how they were educated, how much money they made, how much money maybe they bought the property for, or at least how much it was worth, whether they own it, whether they rent it, was it mortgaged. So it's a great resource, and we'll talk a little bit about Census once we get into the ancestry as well. Also great resource through Ancestry and some of these other kind of genealogical sites are military and marriage records. Also great records. I do love stumbling across a draft card or registration for the draft card because they do give you good information about a very specific moment in time where a person lives and maybe who their significant other was. Were they living with family? Were they living by themselves? And also they tell you really interesting information about them, like maybe what their hair color was or their eye color or how much they weighed or how tall they were. So that's a really good resource. And also marriage records are really great. You know, this again goes along with most genealogical research. If you've ever done any of that, you know, marriage, death, baptism, family records, like all of these things are of a kind. Once you can tie a family to a house, then that gives you so much other latitude to do other research to find out about that family and maybe why they built the house, where they built it, who were they, did they get the land through marriage, did they buy the land, like all of these things between families and houses tie together. Like you're not just researching the house, you're researching the family in the house. And the research of the family tells you more about the house or tells you more about the property. So all of this, you know, knits together very well. Interestingly, this is a marriage record that we found from Georgia that told us why a family ended up together. We were having a hard time. It was a cemetery in White County. There was a bunch of families there that we couldn't really trace. And then we found this document, which was super helpful because it told us that a pair of sisters had married two different people. So that's why some of the names were so mixed up, was because you had this pair of sisters who were marrying into these other families, and then they all came to Arkansas after they were emancipated. They were African Americans in the 1870s and 80s. So they married in Georgia and then all moved to kind of Arkansas together, and that's how these families all ended up together and then ended up at this cemetery. So, you know, family history is really going to tie a lot of this information together. And then we'll talk about newspapers here in a second. So let's go to, I'm going to pull up Ancestry, which we have a copy of Ancestry for our organization. So I'm going to kind of show you a few things in Ancestry that are really good tools to use for looking at house information, not just people information. Because sometimes it is a little hard to find about properties because Ancestry tends to be so much geared toward people and names. So sometimes you do have to do some little funky things to kind of find what you need. So under Ancestry, which a lot of local libraries, including Cal's, has access to, and again, Heather can provide a little more information about that, about getting to that through the library. But if you're in the library, you also have access to Cal's, including at Central Arkansas Library System and at Arkansas State Archives and maybe your local library. But one really interesting thing is, you know, you can search just like you would normally for people. So if you have names for people that are associated, you know, definitely plug that in. But one great thing about this is that they also have, I'm going to go to the card catalog, record count, because this is one of the largest collections they have, and you can find it by searching for people, but we don't necessarily want people, we want houses, and we want to search by address. So we're going to go to the city directories, and we're going to ignore this for right now, the search for people, and we're going to come down here to browse. And we're going to look at Arkansas. So they have all the different counties in here. We're going to look at Little Rock. You can see there are lots of different cities in here that they do have some for. Obviously, they have the most for Little Rock and North Little Rock. Again, be aware, North Little Rock is mostly included with Little Rock in most years because they're combined as one city for quite a while. And then most of the time, even after they're not combined, they're still in one book because it just makes more sense. And we're going to go to 1958 because that's after those houses are built. So we want to kind of see who's in those houses across the street from the Park Hill fire station. So now we're going to go look at that. And I've actually kind of cheated a little bit. I already looked at this earlier. So we can tell that. So I'm gonna let that good because it's not gonna load there. So I looked up this a little earlier, and in 1958, the city directories for most years are divided into kind of 4 different categories or 4 different sections. There's the Little Rock section that's divided into the people and then addresses, so an address index that goes by city. And then there's the North Little Rock section that's divided into people by last name and then a street index, so by the address. So the street index is really helpful, especially if you still don't know a name associated with a property. And so I found those street names in this under the North Little Rock section. And I'm going to refresh here. Come on. That's it, because I'm in the wrong year, sorry. Well, we'll let this reload here for a second. There we go. But so the city directories, as I said, are divided into a couple of different sections, and it's going to be slow, of course, as I'm trying to do it. What's great is it does have the street index, so you can look up by the name of the street. So we would look up North Little Rock, and we'd look up Magnolia, and then it would go street. It would go down the street, basically from the beginning of that street, wherever it starts, from low number to high number. And so on this one, it would go from, 0, wherever that started, down in near the river, and then it would trace Magnolia all the way up. And what's nice is it also includes information about the side streets. So it does include information about, I may have to just log back in here. The cross streets. So it does include information about, like, okay, here are the numbers, and then 4th Street intersects. Here are the numbers, and then 5th Street intersects, or A Street, or B Street, or D Street. So it is a nice way to track the street, even if you don't know the house number in that year, because usually you can find the house number through this because it does have the cross streets. All right. Okay. Well, I decided it's not going to let me do anything here. There we go. So let's see if I can find something in here. Okay. So here's an example of this here. So so this is 1957. It's not loading 58 for some reason. Ah, finally. Okay. Okay. So here I'm come to the 1958 North Little Rock section of this. So this is the Polk City Directory Guide, and here you can see it's listed by, it'll do the numbered streets first, and then it'll go street by street. And you can see all of this information that it includes. So here's First Street, Pollock Inns, number 200. They do have a telephone. This is Hess, Henry C. Hess, and that little O there means that that's the owner of the property. So we'll go to 667. As I said, I looked this up before. So this is Magnolia Street. So here's Lynch, here's Magnolia, and we want where 34, 18, 20. So this is the block that we're in. There's D intersects, and there's F intersects. So we know we're in the right area. And here are all those people that live on this street. And then here is Mr. Roger Foley. So he's in one of those little houses across the street. Mr. Paul Mosley, William Simpson, all of these people live across the street. And here we can also see that Park Hill water plant. And what's interesting is that all of these people own these houses. So they have purchased these houses and they are the resident owner of those properties. What's also nice is it also will tell you owner, owner, owner. And then you get down to Main Street here and you can see all the names of the commercial things that are in those addresses as well. So we found Mr. Roger Foley in this house. We want to find out a little bit more about Mr. Roger Foley. So we're going to go I found him not in 1958, but in 1957. I did a little search earlier. And I was able to find him. We're just going to back up here a second. Because I've got a name now. I'm going to look for Mr. Here he is in all of these different, oops. Here he is in all of these different ones. So 1957, we're going to view that record. And here he is, that same house, 3418 North Magnolia, Little Rock. And this is in the alphabetical, the kind of what we would use as a, telephone book today, the actual by name. Here's Foley. And here's Mr. Foley and his wife, Jane. And he is an officer manager at Allard Gregory and Son, and his house is at 3418 North Magnolia. So that gives us a little bit more information about him. And you can do this in Central Arkansas with just about any property. So that's definitely something that is worth checking out for the city directories. The Central Arkansas Library at the Butler Center or the Arkansas Studies Institute does have some of the ones available that you can do the paper ones. They don't have many of the older ones because they put those back in the collection. They were kind of falling apart because they're older historic documents. But you can run these through the paper versions as well. You can start in 1990, 2000, and just work your way back and go and see how every person who's lived in that property, usually if they're in the city limits, they are included. So it's definitely worth checking out the city directories. Taking a look here, I think there was one question. Is a brick veneer house more difficult to maintain in terms of foundation problems than a brick home? It really depends. Each house is different. Most houses that we look at today that are built today that are brick are actually brick veneered, and they're a frame house with brick on the outside. A true brick house tends to be an older home, and actually the structure is made of brick. This is like stone houses. The structure is made of stone. So for to be an actual brick house that we would call a brick house would be the structure itself is made of brick. And those are actually a lot more uncommon than brick veneered property. You saw in that Sanborn map that most of those houses that look like they're brick in Park Hill are actually brick veneered. They just have brick on the outside. And again, I think it would really just depend on the way it was built and when it was built, whether those have foundation problems or not. Up on top of Park Hill, that's a pretty big rock up there. So I think the foundations tend to be pretty sturdy. Not a lot of sinkage. So let me get back to my share here. And then we've got just a few more little things I want to cover. One is newspapers. Newspapers are great, include great information about historic properties. They are a tad hard to research unless they've been digitized and archived. So What's great in Arkansas is that some of those Arkansas newspapers, including the Gazette and Democrat and some older papers and other smaller papers, have been digitized up through at least the 1920s. CALS has done a great job with getting that initiative started and kept going. A lot of those papers are through newspapers.com, which only, unfortunately, right now is only available if you're at the library. If you're at the library and go to newspapers.com, any branch, then you can search those papers for free at the library, those ones that have been digitized. The actual those microfilm copies of the newspapers, Arkansas Gazette, Arkansas Democrat, are available at the Central Arkansas Library System on the second floor at the main building downtown. It's really great if you know an exact date with maybe like a building opened, or like this one we found on this one of all of these boys standing in front of the Arkansas Democrat building, the newspaper building. We just happened to run across it because I knew they moved into this building at a certain kind of around a certain date. So I was able to look at a couple of different editions and found this wonderful picture of all of their paper boys standing out in front of their brand new building. So sometimes you can look across something, but it's really helpful if you start your newspaper research if you have a date that you can kind of look around. Sometimes homes, you know, people in the past are just like people today. They love to hear about new real estate, and they love to hear about people moving into new homes. So how we have a real estate section every week in our newspaper today, they had a real estate section as well. Usually on Sundays, they would run, you know, here, look at all these great new houses that people have built, and look at all these great new architects, and look at all these, you know, fun house plans that you can build yourself. So they were still doing that. So I tend to, whenever I'm looking at newspaper, just pick a year and look at the Sunday papers, because I find lots of really fun stuff that I wasn't even looking for. And a lot of times you can run across pictures of new houses, especially in Central Little Rock, in some of the bigger neighborhoods and more affluent neighborhoods. They were taking pictures of buildings in the 19 teens and 20s and 30s and putting them in the paper, and saying, oh, look at Mr. So-and-so's brand new house. Isn't it cool? And sometimes we find really great information from that. That's rare. That's not a common thing, but it is sometimes that you do come across it. I would also suggest, if you do want to really get into some of the newspaper information, you can get the Arkansas State Library, which is a different organization. They are on Capitol. Before you get to the Capitol, they're on 5th Street. The Arkansas State Library does have some online archives where you can search newspaperarchive.com, which does have some Arkansas papers, not Little Rock papers, but they do have some other ones, including, I think it's like Blytheville and Hope and some Fayetteville and some, like, there's a few others mixed in there. But sometimes I run across things, especially like big events or local information in some of those papers. And then any paper that's not Little Rock centric, I would definitely check out the Arkansas State Archives. That's the one that's at the Capitol that used to be known as the History Commission. They have a wonderful collection of newspapers on microfilm, and some that, you know, are really old into the, you know, mid 1800s, 1880s, 1890s, all the way through the 1990s on some of these in 2000s. For lots of different communities across the state. Now, again, for newspapers, you generally want to start with a date, because you may not want to go through 100 years of papers to find something. But if you can start with a year or a month or something, that does tend to be a really good resource. And sometimes it's the only resource. I have found information for properties where I knew it was built in a certain year, and I just had to look at every page in that year to be able to figure out when it was built. I did that for a paper out of Harrison for a little property that was there. We knew it was built that year, but we didn't know anything else about it. And I looked through, luckily it was a weekly paper, so I didn't have to look through that many, but we're able to find information for that property. One of the last things I'll talk about is architectural drawings. Architectural drawings are fabulous. If you have a house that was built by an architect and can find the drawings, you've hit a jackpot. They can tell you so much about how it was designed, when it was designed, why it was designed the way it was. Architectural drawings are an interesting type of drawing. They're very technical. If you're not sure how to read something on architectural drawing, definitely get in contact with us or get in contact with your local builders who can tell you more about kind of what you're seeing in these. This is a residence that we were called in on to do some research for National Register nomination in Malvern. This is the Billings Cole House, and we found out that it was designed by Irvin McDaniel. He's an architect from Hot Springs, and his son was also an architect in Hot Springs. And luckily enough, after doing some digging and trying to find if these drawings still existed, we found that somebody at some point in the past had donated them to special collections in Fayetteville. So the University of Arkansas Special Collections in Fayetteville does have quite a collection of various Arkansas architects. Their biggest collection is obviously Fay Jones, the Arkansas architect, that they have basically some sort of representation drawing of nearly every project he ever did, because his whole office basically got donated to the archives at the end of his life. But there are other collections across the state that do hold architectural drawings. Obviously, not every house was designed by an architect. A lot of them were designed by contractors or local, or just the person who lived in it wanted this type of house that they found in a house plan book. So not every house has an architect, but if you are able to discover who the architect was, sometimes you can find the drawings. Sometimes they're left in the house by previous owners, or sometimes they're in we do have a couple of Arkansas architectural firms that have been in existence for a long time, including Cromwell, which is the successor firm to Charles Thompson, and many other firms. So sometimes you can find those. The Old State House has a really good collection of Charles Thompson drawings. And again, on this resource sheet, I have listed all of the architectural drawings kind of collections that we really know about and have a good resource for. University of Arkansas Special Collections has quite a few. The Hot Springs Historical Society has a big collection of McDaniel work. Texarkana has a big collection of Witt, Siebert, and Halsey, who were a local firm. The Roberts Library, or the Arkansas Studies Institute, has various stuff that's been through the University of Arkansas at Little Rock that were donated. These include things from Sanders and Gnocchio, Frank Gibb, just various stuff that's been donated. There's some churches that some of their architectural drawings are in the collection, as well as the Arkansas State Archives, again, what used to be known as the History Commission. They have various drawings by various architects. It just depends on who donated what. So here's the front image of that house, and here's the house today. So you can definitely see that those are followed pretty faithfully. And a couple more of those examples of those drawings. What's great about these drawings is we were able to see what changes have happened over time, which are not a lot. And we're also kind of be able to see the intent of the architect and what he wanted to do, what the design was supposed to look like. My final advice is to really Google anything. So if you find a name, if you find a date, if you find a architect, if you find something, Google it. Because what's great is that so many things have been put online. And I'll just show you one example here. Google Books is fantastic. If you search something, so I'm going to search Frank Gibb, because I know he shows up a bunch. And I'm going to search in books. What's great is that so many old archives have been digitizing things, and Google has been digitizing things, and sometimes you get really weird results that are really, really helpful. You can see here that some of these things are like annual reports from 1908, or the London Gazette from 1954. You get really strange results. But what's interesting is sometimes you can find these old court cases that have information. And here it is that, at the office of Frank Gibb and Company, I've used this source before. It's a Supreme Court case, but I found where his office was located in that year from that court case. And sometimes here's that pictorial history of Arkansas from the earliest time, Faye Hampstead. This has something in it about Mrs. Frank Gibb, who was also a very prominent person who I was able to learn more about through some of these things. And here's a record of something that happened in 1905, which was the building, that happened in 1904, was the building of Frank Gibb designed the Pavilion for Arkansas, the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. And there was a big court case that happened because there was another person who was supposed to design it, and he never submitted the correct designs, and so they were paid for it by the state. And I found out a lot of this information by just using Google search and finding these really random notations online, to being able to find if, what he was doing in those times. Again, information about his wife from 1918, who was a very prominent suffragette. And so I found a lot of this information just by sticking names in search engines and trying to find out information about these people that show up in different things. Some things that show up sometimes are things like the Engineer's Journal, which was a really prominent magazine for engineers. There's also a couple that were for architects and for contractors and for people who were in construction from about 1880s through the 1920s and 30s. There were these magazines that people put out, weekly sometimes, that included, building projects and people who wanted bids, and new county courthouse projects, and, local big money contracts that were out that needed to have bids placed on them. And every once in a while you'll find so-and-so architect did this big bank in Blytheville. And we were able to see, who the architect was that we couldn't find anywhere else because this magazine had talked about them being the contractor on it, and from 1910 or 1912. So it's always definitely worth putting it in Google and looking at the book results. And sometimes you find some really interesting gold that's buried that you would have never come across any other way. So that's basically my spiel for today. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to video. So I am happy to, Heather, I wanted you to talk about the ancestry availability for people who have library cards. And then I am open for questions if anybody has anything specific. I know I've gone over a lot of different information and a lot of different resources. And Heather, definitely let me know if you think I've left something out.
No, I think you covered, I agree with you about Google Books. I was away from history for about 7 years, and I came back and everything was online and I could find stuff. I didn't have to go to the library. I could do it at midnight. So that was really exciting. Yeah, if anybody has any more questions, please put them in the chat, and we can look at that. I've put in the chat, just in case, about the library edition. I know a lot of people have paid subscriptions to Ancestry. It's very, very popular, but the library does provide that service, that subscription at all of our branches. CALS does. And if you're not in Central Arkansas, if you're not here in Pulaski and Perry County, then your local library most likely has it as well. The big differences between the paid subscriptions and the library edition is family trees. On the library edition, you can't just go into your library branch and create a family tree. They don't let you add anything. So you can't participate in discussions on their discussion boards. You can look at the discussion boards and look at other people's family trees. You just can't participate, because I can't imagine how they do that for library patrons. That would be complicated. And the one thing that I always like to point out to people about the library edition that I think is different than the paid subscription, but it's been a long time since I've been on a paid subscription. When you email, there's a way to email documents that you find to yourself. And it usually says on the side, when you go into not the view image, but when you go into the record that's been, has gone through the OCR indexing, it'll say over to the side, email this to, and so you'll put in your email address and you put it in another time to confirm, and then you send it. That goes into one email, and every time, no matter what day you send yourself stuff, it's one long, never-ending list. So you kind of have to go and process those things, so to speak, because you can get back and go, wait, I already thought I looked at that. And you did 3 years ago, but you thought about it.
It's still on your list.
Right, exactly. And so also newspapers.com is part of Ancestry, but it's not part of what they're allowing people to use from home during the pandemic. And so we have been trying to get access for our patrons to newspaperarchives.com, but it has taken a little bit longer than we expected. So we tell people to look at the Library of Congress and their Chronicling America. There are 41 Arkansas newspapers of some sort in that collection. So take a look at that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that one. The Chronicling America, if you just type in Chronicling America in Google or Library of Congress Chronicling America, you'll find it. But that is through the Library of Congress, and that is a really good resource. And it holds newspapers from not just Arkansas, but all over the country. So it is a good resource, especially sometimes you'll just find really interesting stuff about people when they travel, or, you know, if they, like I was talking about the Gibbs, I plugged in Frank Gibb and his wife, Mary Gibbs, into that and found that they were in Washington, D.C. for a little while visiting some people. And I was like, oh, this is a really interesting connection that I didn't know about. So it's definitely worth checking them out. I know there are a few questions.
There are a few questions. Rosalind is asking why ownership data in AR data only goes back 2 owners to 2007. Do you see that one?
Yeah, in the Arkansas data in Arkansas County, and those 2 websites, really, it depends on which one your county subscribes to. So if there's information in one, there's probably not information in the other, because it's a kind of a subscription based. It's whichever one your county has signed up to work with and present that information. And they don't go back that far. The assessor data and that kind of data is really good to give you a start. They don't go that far, and that's where I would suggest going to look at other things like city directories and archives to see if you could find out who owned them. Sometimes that information is just not available if you're in a town that really doesn't have their city directories, or they're hard to find, or they're in an archive where you can't visit right now. Sometimes that data from the county clerk, the real estate, is the only way to do that, is to actually run the deed. And that is something that I would ask your county clerk about, what's the best way to do that. Sometimes they have people who will do it for you. Sometimes they have office hours where you come in and run those deeds. And when you're running a deed, what you're basically doing is looking at, okay, who owns the property now? Who did they buy it from? Okay, now I got to go back to this one. That person who owned the property before, who did they buy it from? And you're basically running it back each transaction. So you're looking at, when was it purchased? Okay, who was the previous owner? You look up that owner and see when they purchased the property. So you're kind of running it back through history. And sometimes that's a very long process, and sometimes people own their houses for 90 years, and it's a really short process. So it really just depends on the property. But again, I would contact your local county courthouse and ask them what their process is for researching deeds in that county, because it is slightly different for every county. In Pulaski County, you can look it up online. You can find those book and page numbers and look it up online. It's a little bit of a clunky system, but it's possible to do it. I've done it. They don't have everything digitized is also a problem. So sometimes you might find one that says, oh, it exists, but we don't have a scan of it. So you'd have to go to the courthouse anyway. So it's definitely a place to look. I tend to look at other resources first before running a deed, unless I just have to, unless there's no other way to get that information.
Well, and Rosalind says that she's in Hillcrest. So the AHPP,
yes,
there's an overlap.
Email us. Email us. Email me, email info@arkansaspreservation.com, the address of the property. And if it's in Hillcrest, we likely have a survey of it and can get you at least some basic information to start on. And sometimes we've already done some of that research already and have it in the survey form. So definitely email us your info and the property you're looking at, and we can get you back with that information.
And that goes for Dixie as well. She says, where's a good place to start researching a home in Hillcrest that they think was built in 1920? Yeah, get with the AHPP, get with the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. There's probably a record on your house.
Yes, and especially
for Hillcrest certificate.
Yeah, if it's already in the district and already a contributing feature, it's already listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Contributing houses in a district are just like they're listed individually. We can send you a certificate even, signed by the governor.
My husband used to be responsible for getting certificates, so I'm sorry for whoever's responsible for that now that I just offered that as a service.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. It's a process, but we do it. So definitely email us. That's a good place to start. And if you're in Little Rock, if you're in Hillcrest, if you're in, even things like on University, I mean, anything that's kind of a core of historic Little Rock, there are city directories, there are Sanborn maps, there are lots of different places that you can find ownership information and information about these properties. So definitely take a look and let us help you get started, because we don't want you to have to do things over again if it's already there. I think the next one was we'll be discussing land grant research in the May 30th presentation. No, I'm basically going to be giving this presentation over again, and then still have time for questions as well. So if you have questions, definitely come back, get a refresher, and then be welcome to ask questions again once you've maybe had some time to do some of this research. The land grants are kind of a weird animal. They are going to be something that you would find when you ran your deed or ran that information. There's a whole nother kind of set of research for doing things that are really old. So this kind of went back to about 1900, 1880s, 1890s. For things that are older than that, or if you're looking for properties that are older than that, that get back into kind of early Arkansas history and even into kind of territorial Arkansas history, if you go past, 1836. We do have information on land grants in Arkansas. The Bureau of Land Management website is a really great resource, and you can plug in if you know the section, township, and range of your property, which you can find on the assessor's website. That tells you what section, township, and range is in, and that's based on the Jeffersonian grid that was established for the Louisiana Purchase. It's what everything in our part of the world is based off of, these squares and squares and squares. If you can find that information and go to Bureau of Land Management and plug that in, that's a great place to start, because they will have the information on those kind of land transactions that were very early. So land grants to soldiers, or original land grants, or original settlement property where you arrived and just, you homesteaded. So that's a good resource for that. That does get a little bit more tricky once you start looking into land property, land resources. It's again kind of like running deeds. You just have to be very patient and just kind of read through all of these documents. Definitely take good notes as you do that, because you don't want to have to go back and do it again. But yeah, Bureau of Land Management is your best chance, and they have a pretty good search system for their resources based on mostly section, range, and township.
Well, and I'll plug another one of our programs. Our Finding Family Facts program, I was responsible for doing it in April, and I always do Bureau of Land Management because it is a great resource, and it's a really well done website. So Kay, if you go to YouTube on the COWS channel, go to Finding Family Facts. There should only be one video, and you can fast forward, you can scrub through almost to the end is when I talk about land management. I do tend to ramble a little bit, so it may be an hour into the presentation, but yeah, I give a brief overview of how to get onto it and how to look up things.
And it's a good resource, and we always have people who are very interested in that, and sometimes we have people we have information that was submitted to our office that traces the history of land ownership for a house that was built in 1910 back to 1820 or 1830, which is great. That is great information. But for the National Register of Historic Places, and when we're looking about house histories, we will, it's interesting to know who owned the land when the house was built. But for us, looking at the history of the house, it's not as much. The family would be interested in that older history of that land and how it got developed. But for the history of the house, that's tended to where we start, is who owned the land when it was built. And sometimes you have to determine that, you have to go back in time and find out who sold it and when it was granted and all of this kind of stuff. I will also note that, especially if you're looking at properties in Northeast Arkansas, land ownership gets real funky, because there's a chunk of Northeast Arkansas that's not on the original Jefferson grid. And that's because it was considered Spanish land grants. There is a chunk of Arkansas that was included in some of these Spanish land grants when Spain actually owned Arkansas, before it was the United States, before it got included in France, before it got included in the Louisiana Purchase. And some of these were still recognized when Arkansas became a state. And so there's a weird patch of, if you look at you can see the section, township, and range on Google Earth. That's a layer you can put on. And you can look at these old maps, and you'll get up into Northeast Arkansas, and it'll be straight, and then it'll do this, and then it'll have these weird pieces of land. So some of that does get really interesting and weird when you're looking at property, because all of a sudden you'll see, oh, granted by, you know, whatever president to whoever, and then you'll see these other things that are in Spanish. So there is some weirdness in Northeast Arkansas to just be aware of if you're looking at properties. And that tends to be like Blytheville and kind of things against the river in really far east Arkansas, some of those counties. So just be aware of that you may run into some funkiness if you're doing land research. You may also get into a bit of funkiness if you're looking at West Arkansas, and you get real early because you're looking at Native American grants and Native American land. So anything kind of west of the Quapaw line, and you'll get into some things that were affected by treaties for Native Americans. So some of that also gets a little funky, and sometimes gets a little dicey to research, because there's people on land that they technically didn't have a right to prior to certain dates. And then they'll claim that, and it'll be a problem because now that land is, you know, not legal, you know, in that date. It's now is, but you know, so some of that stuff on treaty lands gets really complicated too.
I think we've covered everybody's questions.
Awesome.
You've gotten a lot of great presentation, valuable information, well organized. So those are always good. We are recording this. I said this at the beginning, but we have recorded this. And because we set this up as a webinar, it is my understanding that then we will be able to email it to the participants. So I will figure out how to do that on Monday. But we will also put it on our YouTube channel, and at some point it will go, AHPP will have a copy, we will have a copy. So if you have any questions or you need to figure out how to access things from the Roberts Library, you can call us Monday through Saturday, 9 until 6. There's someone answering the phone. We are not open right now to the public. We don't know when that will happen, but you can call us. It's 501-320-5700, and someone is answering the phone during business hours. You can also email us at arcinfo@cals.org.
And my email, I think, was also included, my work email was included in the copy of the research resources that you received this morning about 9:30. So definitely email me or info@arkansaspreservation.com. That's our general email address. If you have questions, if we can find a survey for you. Our office hours are normally 8 to about 4:30, most on weekdays, and we are open to the public, kind of. We are only accepting people in our building that have appointments, and we are doing pretty rigorous testing in terms of temperature testing to have people come in the building. So definitely call or email, and we can get any information that we have. Most of it is digital, so we can get that to you if you have a question.
Great. Thank you so much, Callie. This is perfect. And if you are interested in seeing the presentation again, or asking, once you've done some research, asking Callie some additional questions, you can register starting tonight or this afternoon at 5 p.m. for the May 30th session. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Heather, I just saw one that somebody needed that research resources, and we'll get that email to you.
I will do that. And if somebody, for some reason, they didn't get it, I sent it right at 9:30. So if you didn't get it, or it ended up in your spam or your trash or whatever, email one of us and we'll get it to you for sure.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Callie.
Thank you.
Bye.